I grew up in a period of war. When the war started in Lebanon, I was 13. This was the realization that the war was actually happening because of social injustice. But at the same time, it's very interesting because you've got war and conflict and violence, but within it, you could feel that as a woman, you're being raised in a different way. There are different expectations. I was in a Catholic school originally for girls, and actually there was an indoctrination. We were not expected to be anything but wives and good housewives. We were not expected to go further into our education, and that was for me quite upsetting because you're in a setting where you're supposed to learn, but actually your learning is very much curtailed. This and the war, I think, were an explosive combination which triggered quite a lot of rebellious feelings first, but also feelings that this isn't how things ought to be, and they ought to be different. So that's basically the background to, I think that's the background to activism. With the Collective for Research and Training on Development Action, CRTD-A, was formed in 1999 by a group of us who were truly wanting and keen to do something in the late 90s after the Beijing conference, with the realization that problems facing women in the Middle East and North Africa region are very, very much similar. Family codes inspired by religion, culture and tradition inspired by religion, all male governments were all actually forming a powerful ensemble to put women in their place. But at the same time, there was a lot of positive energy coming out of Beijing, not just Beijing, but quite a period which led up to Beijing in terms of preparations, mobilizing, etc. And we felt that it would be significant to do work on legal reforms, awareness raising, citizenship, economic rights, women's leadership, but not on a small level only, but actually take stock of the dynamics and the relationships and the alliances that was created in Beijing. And so we set up the organization in 1999 with the specific purpose of working on gender and citizenship. The choice of citizenship was very critical because in the region, women are not perceived as citizens of the state. They are perceived as subjects of their families and husbands and what have you. So the concept of women as entitled citizens, as women having or should be having direct access with the state was quite important. Women's economic rights was seen as for us as a main priority because women in the MENA region have the worst indicators globally in terms of participation in the formal economy, in terms of economic power, in terms of material possessions, and also leadership and political participation, because although the region had done well in terms of, to some extent, bridging the gender gap in education and health, it failed to do so in terms of women's economic and political participation. In 2001, in a gathering of all our colleagues, women activists from the region, from the Arab region, we identified one glaring problem that brings together all the Arab states. Although they have a hard time agreeing on something, they agreed on this particular issue, which is denying women the right to transmit nationality to their spouses and their children. And this was very significant because of all the discriminatory laws in the Arab region, this was which are more subtle. Nationality laws are very crude in their discrimination because they say very simply that men have the right to transmit nationality, women do not have the right. And this is a typical tribal view of women. You get out of the tribe, then you get sanctioned, number one. Number two, it's an acknowledgement by Arab states that women are not citizens, are not full-fledged citizens, and therefore are not able to transmit nationality. Plus because we come from a perspective of all rights are indivisible, the denial of this right had an impact on all sorts of other rights for women and their families. The campaign moved from one stage to the other. The first stage was mostly fact-finding, understanding the issue, understanding the intersection between this right and other rights, but also, and most importantly, understanding how do women live the denial of this right? What does it mean to them on a daily basis? The fact-finding was followed by a very important period where we tried to make contact, engage with these women. Because when we started the campaign, we had very few women who were ready to speak out, and they were afraid. They were afraid that there will be retaliation, that they will not be able to renew residency permit, that there will be deportation, which were all reasonable fears. They were not exaggerated. So we worked with women directly. We did, as part of the Women Learning Partnership, we did leadership training, we did political participation training, we did communication training, advocacy training, etc. And the third phase was actually a full-fledged campaign, including work directly with the media, which was made possible by all this skill building phase. Women were able to talk to the media, to overcome their fears, to explain clearly what is their lived experience of a denial of a basic right. The other part of the campaign, of course, I'm talking about a regional campaign, was direct lobbying with politicians, parliamentaries, jurists, members of the executive, and a regional campaign followed by an international campaign that was spearheaded by the Women Learning Partnership. An international campaign actually with no geographical borders on the need to reform nationality laws, on the need for the non-discriminatory national laws. And with the Women Learning Partnership, we moved this campaign even further into an understanding of what is inclusive citizenship. We put nationality within a broader construct of what constitutes citizenship and what constitutes inclusive citizenship for women. Of course, the challenges varied from one country to the other. As of 2004 until recently 2010, several Arab countries started changing their laws. And I think one of the important contribution of this campaign was in making the issue of inclusive citizenship a political issue, a public issue, an issue on the agenda of policymakers. And whether or not reforms in various countries like Egypt, Algeria, Morocco, Yemen, Palestine, the Emirates, even Saudi Arabia had some sort of reform. Whether or not these reforms were partial or better than partial, what they indicate was a recognition of the rights of women to be full-fledged citizens, which was important for us. The challenges were basically, again, similarly as the successes, the challenges varied from one country to the other. In a country like Lebanon, there was we encountered the greatest challenge because by definition, Lebanon is a very patriarchal country, and it's based on a complex political system called the confessional system, whereby power is allocated to sectarian groups, and the power over families is held by religious communities. And the whole construct of the country is based on some myth about the demographic statistics between the different groups. And so religious leaders and some political leaders in Lebanon did not and still do not want to see any change that actually undermines their power. And a change in the status and position of women actually undermines their power, undermines their control over families. We're still struggling with this challenge now. We're struggling with it in terms of bringing in knowledge about how what we are dealing with are the interests of religious leaders, even the financial interests of religious leaders, versus the demands of women. We are addressing this challenge by using international instruments like CEDAW, the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which Lebanon has signed and ratified in 1996, but forgot to implement it. But nevertheless, the state is accountable. And we, as part of the Women Learning Partnership, we are taking this campaign to the Commission for the Status of Women, to the Universal Periodical Review of Human Rights, to the international arena, and highlighting the failure of Lebanon to implement a very important convention and to deny full citizenship to its women. We have been engaged in this partnership almost since we started. In a sense, we've been almost like one organization. What it has meant to the work was actually giving it the necessary support in terms of skills, in terms of connections, in terms of visibility, in terms of solidarity between the different WLP partners. In fact, many of the Women Learning Partnership partners are part and parcel of this campaign. So, which meant that there was a unified voice, a collective voice, and actually a very powerful voice for reform. It has also meant being able to multiply our international advocacy, being able to spread awareness and knowledge beyond beyond the confines of the organization and of the campaign, and also truly bringing pressure to our duty bearers, to our governments, and actually also embarrassing them to go forward with some intermediary steps which I think eventually will lead to a full reform of the law. I think the space that was provided by the Women Learning Partnership meant that we were able to learn from each other, we were able to support each other, we were able to take all the lesson learned throughout this process, which is now more than 14 years old, and turn it into case studies, turn it into scenarios for training, turn it into advocacy, new knowledge on advocacy, and also provide inspiration and support to each other.